I remember the sound of laughter more vividly than the alarm that followed. It echoed across the obsidian gates of the Interstellar War Academy, sharp, layered, inhuman. Each voice carried the distinct resonance of its species, the harmonic chimes of the crystalline Varel, the low synchronized hum of the Threxian hive minds, the distorted gravity pulses of my own kind. Together, we formed a chorus of superiority. We had earned our place here. Every cadet standing beneath those towering gates represented the pinnacle of evolution, strategy, and warfare. Generations of refinement, millennia of dominance. The galaxy did not send its weak to the Academy. And so we laughed. Because at the edge of our formation, just beyond the orderly lines of armored elites and bioengineered prodigies, stood something that did not belong. She was late. Not by measurable time, the Academy tolerated no such imprecision, but by presence, by expectation, by everything we understood about power. Small, soft, unmodified, organic in the most primitive sense. A human. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some clerical error buried deep within the Academy's otherwise flawless selection systems. Perhaps she had wandered here. Perhaps she was a servant, lost and trembling beneath the weight of beings far greater than herself. But she was not trembling. That was the first detail that unsettled me. She stood still, her posture balanced but relaxed, as if the suffocating gravity of scrutiny pressing down upon her simply did not register. Her uniform lacked distinction, no adaptive plating, no neural conduits, no visible augmentations. Fabric. Simple. Utilitarian fabric. The kind worn by species that did not survive long in war. The laughter grew louder. I did not join it. Not because I felt sympathy, but because something in my perception faltered. A subtle distortion, like observing a star that refused to flicker when it should have already died. The intake sequence began. A towering construct of alloy and sentient circuitry descended from above the gate, its surface rippling with scanning arrays. This machine had judged entire civilizations. It had reduced warriors to numbers, potential to probabilities, futures to outcomes. It did not make mistakes. One by one, cadets stepped forward. Green. A soft, approving glow. Acceptance. Worthiness. A few received yellow. A pause. A deeper scan. Conditional evaluation. But no one received red. Not here. Not ever. Red was not part of the Academy's process. Red meant something else. When her turn came, the air changed. Even the wind, artificially regulated by the Academy's atmospheric systems, seemed to hesitate. The faint hum of machinery dipped into an almost imperceptible silence, as if the entire structure was listening. She stepped forward. No hesitation. No ceremony. Just movement. The scanner activated. At first, nothing seemed unusual.
Its light passed over her form in slow, deliberate waves, mapping biology, neural activity, molecular composition. Standard procedure. Then it paused. Not a glitch, not a failure. A pause. The kind that suggested recognition. A thin, almost inaudible frequency began to rise from the machine. It vibrated through the ground beneath us, resonating in my skeletal structure. Around me, the laughter faded, not all at once, but in fragments, as confusion replaced amusement. The scanner pulsed again. Once. Twice. And then, it screamed. The sound was not mechanical. It was something deeper, older. A warning encoded not just in code, but in instinct. It pierced through every layer of perception, forcing attention, demanding fear. Crimson light erupted from the construct, flooding the gate in violent red. Not a glow, a saturation. Every surface, every figure, Every particle of dust suspended in the air was consumed by it. For a moment, no one moved, because no one understood. And then the display activated. Not the standard evaluation interface, not the numerical assessments we had all memorized. This was different. The text appeared slowly, as if even the system resisted forming the words. Earthborn, do not engage. Silence followed. Total. Absolute. Even the hive minds fractured, their constant internal communication disrupted by something they could not process. The crystalline cadets dimmed, their refracted light collapsing inward. My own kind, beings who manipulate gravitational fields with ease, found ourselves still, frozen. The instructors reacted first. They did not speak. They did not explain. They stepped back. That was when the drones arrived. Dozens of them descended from hidden ports along the gate structure, sleek, angular constructs bristling with weapon systems designed to neutralize threats beyond conventional warfare. Their targeting arrays activated instantly. Every one of them locked on to her. And then they shifted, not into attack formation, into defense. They formed a perimeter around the human, weapons facing outward. Shields activated, overlapping in layers of shimmering energy that distorted the space around her, protecting her. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. The Academy did not protect cadets. It tested them, broke them, refined them through conflict and survival. But this was something else. I forced my perception to focus on her again, to analyze, to understand. She had not moved. Not during the alarm, not during the deployment of drones, not even when the warning, the impossible, incomprehensible warning, had been declared before the entire assembly. Her expression remained unchanged. Calm. Not ignorance. Not confusion. Awareness. As if she had expected this. As if the screaming machine, the red light, the armed response meant nothing. For the first time since my arrival at the Academy, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not yet.
But the absence of certainty. Around me, others began to step back. Not in unison, but instinctively. Distance formed where none had been commanded. Lines broke. Order dissolved. No one wanted to be close to her. No one wanted to be the one who tested the meaning of that warning. Do not engage. The words echoed in my mind, looping, distorting, expanding beyond their simplicity. Do not engage. As if engagement itself was the danger. The instructors conferred in low, urgent tones, their usual authority fractured by something they could not control. Systems flickered, communication spiked and died. The gate, this symbol of order and superiority, had become unstable. And at the center of it all, she stood alone, unaffected, untouched, unafraid. I realized then, with a clarity that settled like cold metal through my core, the galaxy had not prepared us for this moment. There were no briefings, no doctrines, no strategies. Only a warning. A single, desperate command preserved across time and systems. Do not engage. But warnings are born from experience, from something that has already happened. And as I watched the human, this small, fragile, impossible being stand calmly within a fortress built to contain her, I understood the true horror of that message. The galaxy had not warned us about humans. It had tried to erase them. And somehow, one of them had just walked back in, and we were already too close. Silence never lasts at the Academy. Not real silence. Even in stillness, there are always signals. Neural pulses, subharmonic communications. The constant exchange of tactical data between minds engineered for war. Information flows as naturally as breath. And that is why the silence surrounding the human did not remain silence for long. It fractured into whispers. At first they were subtle, fragmented transmissions between cadets who believed themselves discreet, private channels flickering with unauthorized queries, glances that lingered too long, conversations that ended the moment an instructor passed within sensory range. We were not supposed to ask questions. The Academy did not encourage uncertainty. It eliminated it. But curiosity spreads faster than fear. Within a single rotation cycle, the entire cadet body had begun to search for answers. It was a simple query. A standard protocol, input designation, receive history. Every species represented at the Academy had records extending back through epochs. Evolutionary milestones, first contact reports, military doctrines, psychological profiles. We expected the same. We received nothing. Not absence. Corruption. The Central Archive, a system so vast it mapped entire civilizations down to individual behavioral patterns, responded with fragmented data. Broken strings, partial symbols, entire sections of information missing. That was impossible. The archive did not lose data. It preserved, protected, remembered.
And yet, when we searched for Earth, it behaved as though the very concept had been damaged or deliberately erased. I attempted deeper access, override codes, secondary channels, even restricted pathways available only to advanced cadets. Each attempt returned the same result: incomplete records and a silent, unresponsive void where knowledge should have existed. It was not just hidden, it was buried. Around me, others reached the same conclusion. The whispers grew louder. The word passed through the network like a contagion. Extinct. It was a comfortable explanation, a safe one. The galaxy was filled with the remnants of species that had failed to survive their own evolution. Perhaps humans were simply another cautionary tale, erased not out of fear, but irrelevance. But that theory did not align with the warning. Do not engage. You do not issue such a directive for something that no longer exists. You issue it for something that should not be provoked. I began to observe the instructors. Not openly. That would have drawn attention. Instead, I monitored patterns, micro-expressions, shifts in posture, fluctuations in vocal frequency when the subject of the human arose. They were afraid. Not visibly, not in a way that compromised authority, but in the subtle ways that only trained perception could detect. They avoided direct discussion, redirected inquiries, enforced discipline with unusual rigidity whenever the topic surfaced. And yet, they listened. Every whisper, every speculation, as if they were not just suppressing information, but containing it. The human, meanwhile, moved through the Academy as though none of this concerned her. She attended briefings, followed protocols, existed within the structure with quiet precision. She did not seek attention, but she did not avoid it either. It was as if she understood that attention was inevitable and irrelevant. That unsettled me more than the warning. Most species reacted to the Academy with some form of adjustment: heightened alertness, defensive behavior, attempts to establish dominance or alliances. She did none of these things. She simply was. Days passed. The whispers did not fade. They evolved. Rumors began to diverge into something more complex, less about what humans were and more about what they had done. Each version contradicted the last. None could be verified. All felt incomplete. The truth, whatever it was, lay beyond our reach, until it didn't. The opportunity came during a closed tactical briefing, an observation session led by one of the Academy's oldest affiliates, a relic of earlier conflicts, a mind that had witnessed wars long before most of our species had achieved interstellar capability. He was not an instructor. He was something else, a survivor. His designation was difficult to translate into my language, but its closest approximation was Tactician Emeritus. He did not speak often. When he did, others listened.
The session itself was routine. Analysis of historical engagements, breakdowns of strategic failures, predictive modeling, standard curriculum. Until the humans designation appeared in the system. It was a minor inclusion, a simple note within a broader dataset, but it changed everything. The room shifted, cadets stilled, instructors hesitated, and the tactician paused. It was not a long pause, but it was enough. His gaze, multi-layered, ancient, focused on the display. For a moment, something passed through his expression. Not fear, recognition. And then before anyone could redirect the session, he spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried. Every system in the room seemed to amplify it, ensuring that no one could miss what came next. Humans, conflicts by their nature, end conflicts, not conflicts end humans. The words settled like gravitational collapse, heavy. I felt the shift immediately, not just in myself, but in everyone present. Because that statement did not describe a species. It described a conclusion, a finality. Conflicts, by their nature, escalate. They expand, intensify, spiral into chaos until one side achieves dominance. To end a conflict is to bypass escalation entirely, to reach the outcome directly. The implications were profound and terrifying. No one spoke. No one questioned him, because we all sensed the boundary we had just approached. The instructors moved quickly after that. The session was terminated under the pretense of system instability, data feeds were cut, access logs were wiped. Whatever fragment of truth had surfaced was immediately buried beneath layers of protocol. But it was too late. We had heard it. And once knowledge exists, it cannot be undone. As we dispersed, the whispers returned, but they were different now, sharper, focused. Humans, have they ended conflict? Where did they go? No one had answers, but we all understood one thing. The warning was not about danger in the conventional sense. It was about inevitability. I found myself watching the human again later that cycle. She was alone, positioned at the edge of a training sector, observing a group exercise with quiet intensity. Her posture was unchanged, her expression unreadable. Calm, always calm, as if she existed outside the uncertainty consuming the rest of us. And in that moment, a realization formed, slow, deliberate, inescapable. We had been asking the wrong questions. Not what are humans? Not where did they go? But what happened the last time someone ignored that warning? I studied her, searching for answers in the smallest details. The way she shifted her weight, the precision of her gaze, the stillness that seemed less like passivity and more like restraint. Because that was the final piece that did not fit. If humans truly ended conflict, if they possessed the ability to bypass the very nature of war, then why? Why would the galaxy erase them instead of worship them? The thought lingered, unanswered, unwelcome. And as the human finally moved, turning slightly, her gaze aligning with mine across the distance, I felt something I could no longer dismiss. Not curiosity,
Not uncertainty, but the first unmistakable trace of fear, because in her eyes there was no mystery, only knowledge, as if she already knew what we were trying so desperately to uncover, and worse, as if she knew exactly how this would end, for all of us. The Academy does not wait for understanding. It does not pause for fear, curiosity, or doubt. It tests, and in testing, it reveals truth. The initiation trials began without announcement, no ceremony, no preparation cycle. One moment we were cadets filled with questions. The next, we were candidates for elimination. That is the Academy's way. Break the illusion early. Expose weakness before it has time to hide. The first trial was environmental, a proving ground of pressure, heat, and atmospheric instability designed to replicate the most hostile known worlds. Entire species had failed here, not through lack of intelligence, but because their biology simply could not endure. We entered in groups, not by alliance, but by randomized designation, a deliberate disruption of familiarity, cooperation under strain, or collapse. The gravity chamber activated the moment we crossed the threshold. At first, it was manageable. Increased weight, a subtle pull that demanded adjustment. Most species adapted quickly, recalibrating muscle output, redistributing structural load. Then it escalated. Without warning. The force multiplied. Twofold. Fivefold. Tenfold. I felt it immediately, my internal gravitational regulators straining to compensate, field distortions forming around my limbs as I fought to remain upright. Around me, others reacted in their own ways, exoskeletons locking into reinforcement modes, neural stimulants flooding systems, adaptive tissues hardening under stress. And then, the human. She did not adapt. Not in the ways we understood. There were no visible augmentations, no biological shifts beyond the natural limits of her form. Her muscles tightened, fibers contracting under strain. Her posture lowered slightly, center of balance adjusting with instinctive precision. Primitive. I thought. I was wrong. The pressure increased again. Metal structures within the chamber groaned, support pillars, engineered to withstand planetary collapse, began to warp under the load. The air itself felt dense, resistant, as though it too had weight. One by one, cadets fell. Not dramatically. Not in failure. In inevitability. Limbs buckled, systems overloaded, consciousness faded as neural pathways collapsed under stress. The chamber did not kill, but it came close enough to remind us how easily it could. I dropped to one knee. Not by choice. By limit. My system strained at maximum capacity, every calculation devolved to maintaining structural integrity. Around me, the number of standing cadets diminished rapidly, until only a few remained. And among them, her.
The human's body trembled violently now, not with weakness, but with resistance. Her muscles strained beyond what should have been possible, fibers pushed to the edge of rupture. I heard it then, a faint, sharp series of sounds. Cracking. Bones. Her bones were fracturing under the pressure. And still, she did not fall. Her breathing was controlled, measured. Each inhale deliberate, each exhale a release of tension that should have broken her. But it didn't. She adjusted. Not by strength, by will. The pressure reached its peak, a level that no cadet had ever fully endured. The chamber held its breath, and so did we, because this was the moment, the breaking point, where biology surrendered, where limits asserted themselves, where reality enforced its rules. I watched her closely, waiting, expecting the inevitable collapse, the fall, the failure. Instead, she took a step. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was movement. Forward, against the weight of a world. Something shifted in the chamber then, not physically, but perceptually, as if the trial itself had been disrupted by an outcome it had not predicted. The pressure released. Instantly. Violently. Cadets collapsed as the force vanished, systems struggling to recalibrate. I remained on one knee, unable to rise immediately, my internal fields destabilized by the sudden change. She remained standing, for a moment longer. Then, slowly, she lowered herself to the ground. Not in defeat, in completion. The trial ended. No announcement, no acknowledgement. But we all understood. The second trial began before recovery was complete. Combat, not simulation. Real engagement. The Academy did not believe in safe learning. Pairs were assigned. Opponents selected not for balance, but for disparity. The purpose was not fairness. It was exposure. I observed her match. Her opponent was Threxian, a hive-born warrior with reinforced exoskeletal plating, enhanced reaction speed, and synchronized neural processing that allowed for predictive combat patterns. Superior in every measurable way. The engagement began. The Threxian attacked immediately. No hesitation, no testing phase. A direct assault designed to overwhelm through speed and force. The human reacted. Too slow. The first strike connected, sending her backward with a force that would have incapacitated most organic forms. She hit the ground hard, the impact echoing through the chamber. A murmur rippled through the observers. Confirmation. Expectation fulfilled. But she did not stay down. She rose. Slower this time. Measured. Her stance adjusted. Not to match the Threxian strength, but to compensate for it. The next exchange was different. She did not meet force with force. She redirected. A minimal shift. A slight angle. Just enough to alter the trajectory of the Threxian's attack. The strike missed. Not by distance, but by intention. She was learning. Not over time. In real time. The Threxian adapted, increasing speed, altering patterns.
Each attack more precise, more aggressive. And each time, she survived. Not untouched. Never untouched. Blows landed, impact registered, damage accumulated. But she used it. Every strike revealed something. Timing, range, weakness. She absorbed the information as she absorbed the pain. And then, she changed. Her movements became sharper, more efficient, less reactive, predictive. The next attack came, and she was already moving. Not to block, to end it. A precise shift of weight, a calculated step inside the Threxian's range. A strike, not at its armored exterior, but at the exposed junction beneath its primary limb. The Threxian collapsed. Instantly. Silence followed. Not because the outcome was unexpected, but because of how it had been achieved. She had not overpowered her opponent. She had outlasted him, outlearned him, outthought him. The trials continued. Endurance, neural stress, psychological pressure. Each one designed to fracture identity, to strip away control, to expose the core of what each cadet truly was. She did not break. She bent, adapted, endured. By the end of the cycle, the laughter was gone, completely. No whispers, no mockery, no dismissal, only observation. And something else, something heavier. Respect. Not given freely,
earned. And beneath it, fear. Because we had begun to understand something fundamental. Strength, as we defined it, was limited, bound by biology, by design, by expectation. But the human, she did not operate within those boundaries. She redefined them. Pain did not weaken her. It informed her. Pressure did not break her. It shaped her. Defeat did not end her. It refined her. And as I watched her stand among us, not as the smallest, not as the weakest, but as something entirely other, I felt that same realization settle deeper within me. Humans were not strong in the ways we measured strength. They were strong in ways we could not measure at all, and that made them unpredictable, uncontainable, dangerous. Because if this was what a human could do under controlled conditions, then what would happen when the conditions were no longer controlled, when the trials were no longer simulations of war, but war itself? I looked at her one final time as the cycle ended. Her posture had returned to that same calm stillness. No display of victory, no acknowledgement of what she had done, as if it had all been routine. And in that moment, a single thought took hold, cold, precise, inescapable. The Academy was not testing the human. It was measuring the rest of us against something we were never designed to survive, and we were already falling behind. There are no victories at the Academy, only outcomes, measured, predicted, cataloged. The war simulation was the purest expression of that philosophy, a battlefield not bound by terrain or time, but by possibility itself. It did not simply recreate war, it understood it.
Powered by quantum cognition matrices, the system processed every known strategy, every recorded conflict, every conceivable decision tree across civilizations that had risen and fallen long before most of us had evolved beyond our homeworlds. No cadet had ever won. That was not its purpose. Survival was the highest achievable result, and even that was rare. We gathered in the observation deck, suspended high above the simulation chamber. A transparent barrier separated us from the construct below, a sphere of shifting light and matter, constantly reconfiguring as it prepared to generate war. The human stood alone at its center. No squad, no support. Just a single organic figure against a system designed to overwhelm entire species. The instructors did not announce the start. They did not need to. The simulation recognized her, and it reacted. The chamber dimmed. Then, it recalibrated. I felt it immediately, a subtle distortion in the ambient field as processing layers activated beyond standard parameters. The system was adjusting itself, not to challenge her, but to account for her. That had never happened before. A low pulse rippled through the structure. And then, war began. It did not unfold gradually. It erupted. Armadas materialized in orbit, vast fleets of autonomous war constructs, each capable of planetary annihilation. Below them, entire continents formed and fractured in seconds, terrain shifting to create choke points, resource nodes, defensive strongholds. Enemy forces deployed instantly. No hesitation, no reconnaissance phase. Total engagement. The human did not move at first. She stood within the storm, surrounded by data streams only she could perceive, her expression unchanged as the system fed her impossible scenarios. Then, she acted, and everything about it felt wrong. She did not fortify, did not consolidate resources, did not establish defensive perimeters. Instead, she retreated. Entire regions under her control were abandoned without resistance. Strategic positions, locations that any trained commander would prioritize, were relinquished instantly. A murmur spread through the observation deck. Confusion. Disbelief. I analyzed the data as it streamed across the interface. Losses were accumulating at an exponential rate. Units sacrificed, infrastructure dismantled, territory surrendered faster than the system could even exploit it. It made no sense. War is a balance of gain and loss. She was only losing. Or so it appeared. Minutes passed. Then something shifted. It was subtle. At first, a delay. One of the enemy fleets altered its trajectory, not significantly, just enough to deviate from its optimal path. Another unit hesitated before executing an attack command, its timing misaligned by a fraction. Insignificant, individually, but the pattern was forming. The human continued her retreat, but now her movements carried structure. Each loss was placed, each sacrifice positioned. She wasn't reacting, she was arranging.
The realization struck slowly, then all at once. She was not fighting the battle, she was rewriting it. The simulation responded. Processing load increased, predictive models expanded, attempting to compensate for the divergence. The enemy AI recalibrated, adjusting its strategies to counter her unconventional approach. But every adjustment created new variables, new uncertainties, and she exploited them all. A defensive line collapsed, not because it was overpowered, but because she had drawn the enemy into overextension. A fleet advanced too far, its support lagging behind, creating an opening that did not exist seconds before. She took it, decisively. Not to win, but to destabilize. The system began to lag. Not visibly, not yet. But the flow of data, the perfect seamless cascade of information, developed fractures, micro-delays, processing redundancies, conflicts within its own predictive algorithms. It was trying to simulate a war that no longer followed its rules. On the battlefield, chaos expanded. Enemy units began to behave unpredictably, not malfunctioning, reacting, as if they were no longer operating solely within their program parameters, but responding to something emergent, something beyond calculation. The human advanced, not with force, with precision. Every movement now carried intent beyond immediate gain. She sacrificed again, units, positions, entire regions, but each loss forced the system into deeper complexity, into contradiction. The enemy AI split its focus, dividing resources to address threats that had not existed before her actions created them. Too many variables, too many outcomes. The system strained. Warnings flickered across the observation interface. Processing threshold exceeded, predictive model divergence, outcome stability compromised. No one spoke. No one moved, because we were witnessing something that should not have been possible. The system was not losing. It was unraveling. The human stood at the center of it all, her movements now minimal, almost restrained, as if she had already achieved what she intended. The battlefield around her spiraled into complexity beyond comprehension, conflicts overlapping, strategies intersecting, outcomes feeding into each other in recursive loops the system struggled to resolve. And then, it happened. The lag became visible. The simulation stuttered. For the first time in Academy history, the battlefield froze, just for a fraction of a second. Then again, longer this time. The instructors reacted immediately, issuing override commands, attempting to stabilize the system. It did not respond, because it could not. The human had not attacked its defenses, she had attacked its foundation. War, as the system understood it, relied on predictability, on cause and effect, on actions leading to outcomes within a defined range of tossability. She had removed that range, expanded it beyond limit. The system attempted one final recalibration. A complete reset of its predictive matrices. It failed. Spectacularly. The chamber erupted in cascading errors, light fracturing into incoherent patterns as the simulation collapsed under the weight of its own calculations. And then, darkness. Total. The battlefield vanished. The data streams cut. The quantum core fell silent. For a moment, nothing existed. No war. No system. No outcome. Only the human, standing alone in an empty chamber. The observation deck remained frozen. Every cadet, every instructor, locked in a state beyond shock. Because we all knew what came next. The result. The final evaluation. The system flickered once, twice, and then
Against all logic, all precedent, all understanding, it displayed a single line of text. Outcome, undefined. Not failure. Not survival. Undefined. A result that did not exist within the Academy's framework. A conclusion the system had not been designed to produce. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of realization. The instructors did not speak, did not attempt to explain, because there was nothing to explain. The human stepped forward, exiting the chamber with the same calm precision she had displayed from the beginning. No acknowledgement, no reaction to what she had just done, as if it had been inevitable. Always did, but this time its defenses were misaligned, distracted by the aftermath of the simulation's collapse. For a fraction of a moment, it allowed me through. The file appeared without context, no index, no reference chain, just a designation suspended in the void of restricted space. Earth, quarantine civilization. My internal processes stalled. Quarantine is not a classification given lightly. It is reserved for existential threats, phenomena that cannot be contained through conventional means, rogue artificial intelligences, self-replicating bioweapons, spatial anomalies that consume entire systems. Not species. I accessed the file. Or perhaps, it accessed me. The data did not present itself in linear form. It unfolded layer by layer as if testing my capacity to understand it. The first records were fragmented. Exploration logs, diplomatic exchanges, humanity's introduction to the galactic stage. They were unremarkable. That was the most unsettling part. Humanity had not arrived as conquerors. They had not forced their way into the greater network of civilizations. They had been invited, welcomed. Their early interactions painted a familiar pattern: curiosity, cooperation, rapid technological growth. They shared knowledge, adapted to alien environments with surprising efficiency, established alliances across species boundaries that had existed for centuries. They were not dominant, but they were present, everywhere. I scrolled further. The tone shifted, subtly at first. Trade disputes, territorial disagreements, minor conflicts between allied species, nothing unusual. The galaxy was no stranger to tension. Conflict was a constant, an expected variable in the equation of coexistence. But then, escalation. Not rapid, not obvious. Human involvement increased, not as aggressors, but as participants, advisors, strategists, mediators. They did not start wars. They entered them. And when they did, the outcomes changed, dramatically. Battles that should have ended in stalemate concluded in decisive victories. Outnumbered forces triumphed against overwhelming odds. Entire campaigns shifted direction after human intervention, as if guided by an intelligence that perceived the conflict from a higher dimension. At first, they were praised, celebrated. Their adaptability became legend, their ability to process incomplete information, to make decisions under uncertainty, to exploit weaknesses others could not even perceive. It elevated them rapidly within the galactic hierarchy. They became indispensable. That was the beginning of the problem, because dependence breeds vulnerability, and vulnerability invites fear. The records accelerated. War. Not a single conflict, but many. Interconnected, expanding. What began as localized disputes evolved into something far larger. Alliances fractured. New fronts opened. Species that had coexisted for millennia found themselves on opposing sides of conflicts they barely understood. And at the center of it all, humans. Not commanding, not controlling, influencing, everywhere. Their strategies grew more complex, less predictable. They began to operate outside established doctrines, abandoning traditional principles of warfare in favor of something fluid, unstable, effective. They turned retreat into trap, loss into leverage, defeat into misdirection. I saw battle logs that made no sense, Fleets intentionally sacrificed to draw enemies into positions where victory became irrelevant. Entire planets abandoned, only to become catalysts for larger collapses in enemy infrastructure. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to end wars. And that required something the galaxy had never truly understood: the willingness to lose, until losing became the weapon. The records became darker. Species began to disappear. Not conquered, not enslaved, gone. Their systems intact, their technology untouched, but their populations vanished. At first, it was attributed to collateral damage, the inevitable cost of large-scale conflict. But the patterns did not align. These were not random losses. They were outcomes, the result of strategies so complex that even the records struggled to define them. Human tactics. The phrase appeared repeatedly, flagged, analyzed, then restricted, because no one could replicate them, and no one could defend against them. Panic spread through the remaining civilizations. Alliances shifted, not based on ideology, but on proximity to human involvement. Species distanced themselves, withdrew from conflicts, severed connections that had once been unbreakable. Not out of hatred, but fear, because the truth had become undeniable. Humans did not escalate conflict. They ended it, completely. And when the war finally reached its conclusion, there was no victory, no celebration, only survivors. The final records were the most heavily encrypted. It took everything I had to access them, and when I did, I understood why they had been hidden. A council had formed, not of leaders, but of what remained. Representatives of species that had endured the war not because they were stronger, but because they had been less involved. They made a decision, unanimous. Earth would be quarantined, not destroyed, not invaded, sealed, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. All records of human involvement would be erased or fragmented beyond recognition. Their contributions, their strategies, their very existence reduced to myth. A warning would be embedded into every system that still functioned. Simple. Absolute.
Do not engage, not as a threat, as a plea, because they had learned the truth too late. Humans were not inherently hostile. They were not conquerors. They were not even the most powerful species in conventional terms. But when placed within the system of war, they changed it irreversibly. And if they were ever forced to do so again, there would be no survivors left to record what happened. The file ended there. No closure, no resolution, just silence. I disconnected from the archive, my systems struggling to process the weight of what I had uncovered. Around me, the Academy continued as it always had, structured, controlled, unaware, or pretending to be. My perception shifted. Everything I had witnessed, the trials, the simulation, the warning, it all aligned now, not as anomalies, but as confirmations. The human was not an accident. She was not a mistake. She was a variable, reintroduced into a system that had once nearly destroyed itself trying to contain her kind. I searched for her again, found her standing alone within a dimly lit corridor, her posture unchanged, her presence as calm as ever. Unremarkable, if you did not know what she was, if you did not know what she represented. But I did now, and that knowledge altered everything. Because the red warning, it was not there to protect us from her. It was there to protect us from ourselves, from the choices we might make, from the moment we inevitably forced her to act. She turned slightly as I approached, her gaze meeting mine with that same quiet awareness. No surprise, no curiosity, only understanding, as if she knew exactly what I had seen, exactly what I now feared. And in that moment, I realized something far worse than anything the archive had revealed. The galaxy had quarantined humanity to prevent another war. But the Academy had just brought one back. And if the warning was ignored,
if history repeated itself, then this time, there would be no one left to erase them again. Only the end. Training Sector 7 was designed to simulate chaos. Controlled chaos, predictable in its unpredictability. Multi-species squads were tested on coordination, strategy, and survival under extreme conditions. Every enemy, every trap, every environmental hazard was meticulously calibrated to avoid real injury. It was a game, and we all knew the rules. Until the rules vanished. The exercise began as expected. Cadets deployed in their squads, Virel tacticians flanking the perimeter, Threx-Day shock units moving with synchronized efficiency, gravity-adapted warriors holding the center. Projections flickered around us, enemy units, terrain shifts, weaponized environmental hazards, simulated damage only, monitored by the Academy. Safe, controlled. And then, the glitch came. At first, subtle, a momentary flicker in the holographic interface, a pulse that didn't align with the simulation's algorithm. We noticed but ignored it. Minor errors happen, systems adjust. But the flicker became movement.
And the movement became impact. Projected enemies solidified. Weapons fired with lethal force. Environmental hazards, once inert, activated as if the system had recalibrated them for reality. Fires ignited, structures collapsed, gravity fields fluctuated unpredictably. Chaos erupted. Cadets froze, neural interfaces overloaded, subroutines failed. Leaders hesitated, attempting to issue commands through distorted channels. Panic spread like wildfire. We had trained for survival, but never for reality bending this quickly into threat. Except her. The human moved first. Not with hesitation, not with the indecision that paralyzed us. She assessed the battlefield in a fraction of a heartbeat, her gaze sweeping over every squad, every hazard, every enemy projection now made real. She issued commands, not loud, not forceful, but precise, imperative. Every action had intent. Every word carried weight beyond authority. It worked. Cadets resisted. Threxians refused to reposition. Virels hesitated. But she anticipated it, predicted it, adjusted. Repositioned units by redirecting their actions, not through coercion, but through immediate, undeniable results. She sacrificed territory that could have cost lives, moving squads into harm's way strategically to minimize casualties. She merged units across species lines that had never trusted each other, creating cohesive teams from discord. I watched from the observation deck, internal systems recording every anomaly, every decision. Every movement she made turned impending disaster into structured order. Where we saw chaos, she saw vectors. Where we saw defeat, she calculated opportunity. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning as the battle unfolded and resolved under her control. The simulation's glitches continued, but she adapted faster than the system itself, turning instability into advantage. By the time instructors regained full control, the sector had stabilized, fires extinguished, gravity fields corrected, enemy constructs neutralized, damage minimal. It should have been a disaster. It should have exposed weakness, chaos, failure. Instead, it became proof. Proof of everything the warnings had suggested. Proof that the human was not merely resilient, not merely capable. Proof that she could bend reality within structured systems, reshape threats before they materialized, command loyalty from even the most fractious species, and survive when none of us would. The whispers began anew. This time not out of curiosity, not out of doubt. Respect? Fear? Gratitude. We had seen it firsthand. The warning was no longer theoretical. It had manifested in real time. And for the first time, standing among our fractured squads, I felt something I had never imagined in my career. We were grateful she was on our side, because if she had been the enemy, we would not have survived. The laughter stopped slowly. At first, it was subtle, a pause mid-chuckle, a stifled snicker behind a hand. Eyes that once darted toward her in derision now avoided direct contact. Conversations that had mocked her presence became silent, replaced by the hum of observation. The Academy had shifted. The human had not spoken a word. She had not demanded recognition. She had not flaunted her victories. She had merely existed, and in doing so, revealed truths none of us wanted to acknowledge. No one questioned her anymore, not openly, not even in private channels where mockery once thrived. There was a subtle tension in the air, like charged particles before a storm, where respect and fear merged into something almost indistinguishable. We began to train differently.
Our exercises became sharper, faster, harder. We no longer relied solely on instinct or brute force. We studied her movements, her decisions, her uncanny ability to predict, adapt, and exploit variables we could not even perceive. The way she turned weakness into leverage, chaos into order, suffering into strategy. It was no longer something to scoff at. It became a blueprint. Some cadets could not keep pace. Their systems, their bodies, their minds, unprepared for the speed of adaptation required, fell behind. Some left, quietly, claiming reassignment, or withdrawal from training entirely. Those who remained changed. I changed. I watched her in silence during drills, simulations, combat exercises. Every motion, every choice, every imperceptible shift in posture or gaze was information. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to think differently. Not faster, not stronger, but differently. My strategies, my perceptions, my understanding of threat, everything recalibrated. We began to understand that humans operate outside the measures we had been taught. Strength, speed, intelligence, adaptability, none of these fully captured her potential. She possessed something else, the refusal to accept limits. In a universe engineered for predictability, where rules defined outcomes and systems guaranteed survival if obeyed, she rejected those constraints. She did not merely break the rules, she redefined them, and that made her dangerous. The word dangerous reverberated quietly through the academy. It was whispered between cadets, noted in mental logs, recorded in subconscious processing. Not as insult, not as envy, but as fact. We had been trained to measure strength by conventional means. She showed us that those measurements were irrelevant, that the most effective power was one no one could quantify. We stopped laughing. We stopped mocking. We stopped doubting. And in that silence, a new hierarchy emerged, not one of species or size or neural capacity, but of perception. Those who had adapted survived. Those who did not fell behind, invisible in the shadow of what she revealed. I stared across the training yard one cycle later, seeing her posture unchanged, her expression calm, unyielding. And I understood something we could no longer ignore. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest. They were something far worse. They were the most dangerous, because they refused to accept limits. And in a universe designed to contain all threats, they were the only ones willing to break the rules entirely. We had been taught to prepare for war. We had not been taught to survive a human. Graduation day arrived, as it always did. Ceremonial lights traced the arches of the Academy's Great Hall, banners fluttered silently in artificial wind, and the cadets assembled in perfect formation, waiting for recognition. In theory, it was a celebration of achievement. In practice, it was a ritual of reflection, marking the end of trials that had stripped away weakness, pretense, and illusion. But nothing felt the same, not this year, not after what we had witnessed. We stood not merely as cadets, not as survivors of training, nor as species tested for compatibility or endurance. We stood as witnesses to a truth the galaxy had deliberately tried to bury, a truth embedded in the red warning, whispered in archives, fragmented in records too sensitive for disclosure. The human stood among us, not above us, not below us, beside us, not elevated by ceremony, not diminished by the shadows of fear or awe. She existed within the ranks, an unassuming presence, yet every system in the hall recognized her significance. Every scanner, every internal registry, every neural monitor registered the same alert: Earthborn, do not engage. We understood it now. It was not a condemnation, not a threat, not a label of danger meant to isolate her. It was a responsibility, a warning, a reminder to those who observed her of what humans were capable of the force they could wield, of the systems they could bend, the wars they could end, the chaos they could contain, and crucially, of the restraint they exercised. Every cadet present felt it, whether we admitted it or not. The Academy's walls, lined with histories of conquest and conflict, seemed to shrink before the magnitude of that restraint. Humans could have dominated the galaxy. They could have claimed every system, extinguished every rival, imposed order through overwhelming superiority. But they did not. They chose restraint. They chose survival over conquest. They chose precision over arrogance, strategy over impulse, preservation over annihilation. The red warning existed to remind a galaxy of potential, not punishment, to caution us against provoking what had been tamed, disciplined, and carefully constrained. I glanced around. Some cadets' gazes lingered on her with newfound reverence, others with unease they could not disguise. All of us, however, carried a common understanding. The human's presence had rewritten the rules we had been taught. The limitations we had assumed were no longer universal. As we marched out of the academy, the sunlight spilling across the training fields and corridors, a singular thought resonated within me. The galaxy feared humans, not because of what they had done, but because of what they could do, if they ever stopped holding back. And somewhere behind me, I felt her quiet awareness, calm and unassuming as ever, a reminder that the choice to hold back was deliberate, and that the cost of ignoring it would be measured not in defeat, but in the extinction of those who misjudged her. We departed not only as graduates, not only as soldiers, but as witnesses to restraint so precise, so calculated, and so absolute that it defined the boundary between survival and annihilation. And in that understanding, we recognized the final truth the red warning carried. Power is meaningless without choice, and humans had chosen wisely.